Well, Tim Burton's first Batman movie was a huge success. Let's see what else he has in store for us. Ooh. So Batman Returns came out in 1992, 3 years after Tim Burton's first Batman, and surprisingly, Tim Burton didn't really want to do a second Batman movie. He thought he did what he wanted to do with the first one and just wanted to move on, but because it was such a hit, the studio demanded that he come back for a second. And the only way they got Tim Burton to come back was by doubling his budget and giving him complete creative control over the direction for this franchise. And it's because of this freedom that the studio gave him, Tim Burton really took this opportunity to experiment with his style first and make a Batman movie second. This movie really does come across as just this weird Tim Burton experiment where he wanted to stretch what he could do visually. But watching this again, it doesn't really come together as a Tim Burton movie, and it definitely doesn't come together as a Batman movie. But it's not all bad. There are some things that really do work in this movie, so let's talk about that first. The visuals in this are incredible. Gotham City looks just as dark and dirty and anachronistic as always, but here it's elevated a little bit more because again, they're given much more of a budget, $80 million, but also because it's set during Christmas. You get a lot of Nightmare Before Christmas vibes where there is an attempt to spread Christmas cheer and that warm Christmas feeling, but it's in a city where the concept of goodwill towards men is completely foreign. But also the effects are a lot cleaner in this one than in the last one. While the last one did have good effects that for the most part hold up, there were a couple instances of stop motion or blue screen that haven't aged all that well. This one, on the other hand, has aged a lot better. The effects are incredible. The armor for the Batmobile, which used to be stop motion in the first one, has been retooled into CGI for this film. And while you can tell it's CGI, the armor itself moves a lot smoother and it's just a lot more appealing to the eye. And it's not just the large-scale special effects that have improved, the character designs have also gotten better. For example, Michael Keaton's Batsuit looks a lot nicer in this one than it did in the first one. Now, I love the original Batsuit, but you can definitely tell that it was a first attempt at translating a Batsuit to the big screen. And upon closer inspection, the cowl doesn't quite fit right, and there's just a lot more wear and tear visible on his suit. However, in Batman Returns, the suit is upgraded in every conceivable way. The head sculpt is a lot cleaner, it emphasizes his expressions a lot more, fits his jawline a lot better. Also, it gets the bat symbol right. You know, the thing that's the poster for the movie. Yeah, in the original, I don't know what that design is. It's cool, and I do like it, but just for the sake of consistency, Batman Returns corrected that. But with all the upgrades that this version of the Batsuit comes equipped with, the one thing that doesn't make a whole lot of sense is the idea that it's made out of armor. Now in the original, it was clearly this piece of armor that went over his chest that had sculpted abs and anatomy in it. And in this one, it's kind of the same, although it looks a lot more armored. The anatomy is a little bit more stylized and it feels more tactical. And I just took this as Batman upgraded his armor because of all the times he took bullets to the gut in the first movie. But then when you get the scenes with Catwoman and she repeatedly stabs through his armor with her claws, it really calls into question the durability of this armor, because if it can stop bullets, why can't it stop Catwoman's 1-inch long claws? It's a nitpick, but it does call into question the validity of an otherwise really cool Batsuit. But you can't talk about character designs in Batman Returns without talking about the legendary makeup effects for Danny DeVito's Penguin. Now I'll talk about what I think about Danny DeVito's Penguin later, but just from a visual standpoint, for what they were going in this movie, Danny DeVito's Penguin looks like he should. In this version, he's a monster penguin creature from the sewer, and in this movie, you 100% buy that he is a monster penguin man from the sewer. I mean, the makeup that they do on his face with the extended nose and the receding hairline, and even down to his disgusting flipper hands. The practical effects in this movie are incredible. And the music's great. Danny Elfman did an incredible job in the original Batman, and he steps it up here. And I think it's the music in this that gets across the darker, more mature tone of this movie better than anything else. The score that Elfman crafts for this movie, just like his work on Nightmare Before Christmas, perfectly combines the horror and drama of Batman and his rogues gallery with the cheerfulness and optimism of Christmas. And it comes together to give this beautiful yet uncomfortable sound. And the last good thing I have to say about this movie is the casting. The casting is fantastic across the board. Michael Keaton has already proven himself to be a really effective Batman in the first movie, and he does a great job with it here too. In fact, you get a sense that Keaton was working overtime in this movie to try to give his Bruce Wayne persona a bit more of a character. You see him meeting with Max Schreck, you see him meeting with Selena Kyle, and by the end of this movie you do get a better sense of what Tim Burton and Michael Keaton were going for with this version of Bruce Wayne. And it's that Bruce Wayne doesn't really exist. He's only Batman. Bruce Wayne is just Batman without the cowl, and for what they were going for, it works. But we've also got two new villains in this movie, Catwoman and the Penguin, and I do think Michelle Pfeiffer was a good choice to play Catwoman. She's a great actress, she's young, attractive, she definitely has powers of seduction that come in handy when you're playing Catwoman. And also we've got Danny DeVito as the Penguin, and just like Jack Nicholson as the Joker, I cannot think of a better actor to play the Penguin than Danny DeVito. They transformed this fat, ugly, short guy into a fatter, uglier short guy. It's perfect casting, really. Although I would still love a universe where Joe Pesci got the role instead of Danny DeVito. I think that actually could have been better. But like I said in the beginning of this video, there are really two ways to look at this movie. You can see it as a Tim Burton experimental picture, or you can look at it as a Batman picture. So let's tackle the Tim Burton side first, which I would argue is the more successful side, but it's just bogged down with too complicated a plot and too many of Tim Burton's Burtonisms. For instance, Tim Burton movies always seem to center around a loner or an outcast that's just been rejected by society that nobody understands. And in the first Batman movie, that was the intrigue of Batman, that he is such a loner and that he keeps to the shadows, he keeps all of his pain inside. And the Joker, by contrast, is loud, obnoxious, flamboyant, and is definitely more of a public figure than Batman ever was. But here it's not just Batman that's the rejected loner. Batman, Catwoman, and the Penguin all share this trope. Penguin was abandoned by his family when he was a baby because he was deformed. They tried to kill him by throwing him in the sewer, and he was raised by penguins. Catwoman is this meek, introverted, awkward loner who can't seem to maintain a relationship with anybody romantically, and her apartment is just decorated with stuffed animals and dollhouses that really a lonely kid would play with. So if you're looking for a diversity of characters in this movie, you're really not going to get it. They all kind of focus around this one idea of being an outcast. But aside from the Catwoman and Bruce Wayne romance that I'll get to later, nothing creative or interesting is done with this premise. It comes across more as Tim Burton only had one character type in mind and just let loose with it. And another trope that pops up a lot in Tim Burton's movies is issues with father figures. Now, I don't know whether or not Tim Burton actually had a good relationship with his father or not, but looking at his movies, there's definitely a trend of sons disappointing their father. You see it in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, you see it in Edward Scissorhands, you see it most recently in Alice Through the Looking Glass, and you see it here with the character of the Penguin, who is such a disappointment to his parents that they actually tried to have him killed. But really, what can you expect when your father's Pee Wee Herman? And the last major Burtonism that he threw into this mixing pot of a Tim Burton movie is the whole Red Triangle Circus gang. What are they doing in this movie? I guess Penguin needed henchmen that were humans to carry out his plan against the city. And the way they explain how the Penguin met these circus performers is so rushed. In a blink and you miss it scene of Batman just going through newspapers, that really raises more questions than it answers. Like, the Penguin makes a big deal about being trapped in the sewer for 33 years and having no contact with the outside world, and his performance definitely plays that up. But in this scene, they say that the Penguin was part of this traveling circus as a sideshow freak. So which is it? And that whole circus story doesn't really play into the main plot at all. It just seems like an excuse to get more creepy clowns in this movie, which you know is one of Tim Burton's favorite visuals. For some reason, he just loves creepy clowns. But by far the biggest sin from a filmmaking perspective in this movie is that the plot is just way too complicated. Now, say what you want about Tim Burton movies, but his plots are usually pretty simple, if there even is a plot. Like, the first Batman movie didn't have much of a plot. It was just more of an excuse to show Jack Nicholson becoming the Joker and wreaking havoc on the city, causing Batman to intervene and stop him. It's a pretty bare-bones story, but the visuals and intrigue of the characters suck you into the world and give you an enjoying experience. And really the same thing can be said with Nightmare Before Christmas, Edward Scissorhands, and Beetlejuice, all of which have incredibly straightforward and simple, sometimes insultingly simple, stories. But Tim Burton thrives in that. It allows him to explore different visual and conceptual ideas within this very straightforward narrative. But here, what is the plot? I'll try to sum it up for you as best as I can. So you have the Penguin, who who was raised in the sewer his entire life, except for the part where he was part of the Red Triangle Gang. But he's back in the sewers, all depressed about how everyone at Christmas is having a Merry Christmas. So he's going to disrupt the lighting of the Christmas tree to cause a big distraction so he can kidnap Max Schreck, this billionaire tycoon industrialist played by Christopher Walken. And side note, this may be my favorite Christopher Walken performance. It's just so over the top and hilarious. I love it. But he kidnaps Max and blackmails him into having him escort the Penguin up to the surface so that he can find out who his parents are. But really, he just wants to get the name and information of every firstborn kid in Gotham City so that he can drown them in a vat of toxic waste. Confused yet? We're just getting started. Max Schreck also has this secretary, Selena Kyle, who will later become Catwoman, played by Michelle Pfeiffer, who gets in a little over her head when she discovers that Max has been lying about his big power plant idea, and that he's actually planning on sucking the energy and stockpiling the energy from Gotham City for reasons never fully explained. But Max finds out about this, pushes her out of the window. She falls maybe 10 or 20 stories and just splats on the snow. She's dead. Or is she? A bunch of alley cats come out of nowhere and resurrect her. And now she's this zombie cat person. So now Catwoman's out on the town and doing, I really don't know what she's doing. She stops what's most likely an attempted rape, and then she robs and blows up a sporting goods store, which I guess that sporting goods store was owned by Max Schreck, so maybe she's trying to get Max's attention, but there's no other time in the movie where we see this. In fact, she completely abandons this whole mission, if you could even call it that, to team up with the Penguin to take down Batman. And we're only about halfway, and this is where it really starts to get kind of confusing. So this whole time that Schreck has been helping the Penguin find out who his parents are and giving him publicity, he's actually been grooming him as a mayoral prospect. Yes, that guy is a mayoral prospect. Do I even have to say how stupid that is? But regardless, Max talks Penguin into running for mayor, and he does. And their whole plan is to use the Red Triangle Gang to stir up so much frenzy and horror and chaos that the mayor just has to step down so that the Penguin can take his place. But we can't focus too much on that because at the same time, Penguin and Catwoman have teamed up to try to frame and discredit Batman. And this culminates in the very memorable scene where Penguin and his goons hack into the Batmobile and start driving like maniacs down Gotham City. And while this scene is exciting, it is one of the more ridiculous scenes in the movie, and that's saying something. But let's wrap this thing up. So Batman does get the upper hand on Penguin, and through the court of public opinion shows Penguin for who he really is. So then Penguin goes back into the sewer. He's all upset that his mayor prospects were destroyed, which he never really cared that much about to begin with, so I don't know why he's that upset. So then he goes back to plan A, which is killing babies. Yes, he's gonna try to kill some babies. And after a pretty romantic scene at a masquerade party with Bruce and Selena, Batman, off-screen, mind you, takes care of the entire Red Triangle Gang and stops the whole baby abduction. So then Penguin moves on to plan B, where he's just gonna blow up Gotham. He's got this army of penguins with missiles strapped to their backs. And yes, this is probably the most ridiculous thing that this movie has to offer. And they're gonna march into town square, launch the missiles into the sky, they're gonna come back down, destroy Gotham City. So Batman crashes the party, kills the Penguin, Catwoman's there too. She gets her revenge on Max Schreck. So the movie ends on kind of a bittersweet note where Batman did save the city, but he did lose Catwoman in the process, or at least he thinks he did. She's definitely still alive, even though she'll never pop up in any of the other Batman movies. Whew. That was a lot of movie to get through. And hopefully by me just breaking down the plot, you can see for yourself how this is just way too much going on. The character of Max can be written out completely and you wouldn't miss him. There would be some minor changes to Selena Kyle's origin, but really, you could have her be working at any business or institution in Gotham City and you could have the same outcome. And while we're at it, you can cut the entire subplot of Penguin running for mayor, because while it is one of the few influences that this movie had taken from the comics, it really doesn't fit in the character that they've created for the Penguin. I mean, just look at him. In the comics, it made sense because he was a businessman, he was charismatic, but here he's just this perverted, weird penguin man. So I would cut the stuff about him running for mayor completely out of the story and just have him focus on his true motivation, which is just killing babies. And while we're talking about that, what was Penguin's plan again? He was gonna kidnap babies and kill them to send a message to Gotham, but when that falls through, he just wants to just destroy the whole city. Oswald, that doesn't seem like a great plan, especially when you have missiles already strapped to the backs of penguins while you're abducting children. What was the plan there? Were you so confident that Batman would foil you that you already were planning your backup? Just stick to one or the other, dude. And this is just basic filmmaking stuff that doesn't make sense. We haven't even talked about how this works as a Batman adaptation. So as a Batman movie, they didn't even try to make this a faithful adaptation to the comics in any regard. And while the original definitely took liberties with the source material, it still got the bare bones of these characters and their motivations and why these figures have persisted in the popular culture. Batman is a brooding loner who feels tremendous guilt by the death of his parents, so he takes it out on criminals. Joker is an eccentric psychopath that just wants to challenge Batman and create anarchy and chaos. And while those are some pretty broad strokes to paint these characters, that is what we get in the original Batman. In this one, Batman is still this brooding loner who mourns the death of his parents, so that's okay. But the biggest crimes come in how the villains are portrayed. And talking generally in the comics and in other ways Catwoman has been portrayed in Batman media, she is a cat burglar who is entirely selfish. She just wants to get money for herself. She steals money from those who she thinks can afford it so that she can live comfortably. Here she is a zombie cat human hybrid. Catwoman is the most literal translation of a cat woman that you can get on screen. She has 9 lives, she licks herself, she purrs, and this is just way too literal of a Catwoman take for me. And the fact that she's a zombie come back to life really makes the romance between her and Bruce Wayne awkward, to say the least, because, well, Bruce Wayne doesn't know she's a zombie, we know she's a zombie, and ain't nobody wants to kiss a zombie, no matter how attractive Michelle Pfeiffer may be. And that's another criticism of Catwoman that I have. She is just way too overtly sexualized. Yes, Batman and Catwoman have had romances in the comics. You can do romance without her just reaching down his pants and licking his face. There's nothing subtle about her performance. It's way too over the top, and it's just kind of gross. And speaking of gross, let's talk about how the Penguin's portrayed in this movie. Now, this version of the Penguin is by far the most egregious offense to Batman lore that this movie has to offer. If you don't know, in the comics, the Penguin is a gangster. He owns a nightclub called the Iceberg Lounge. He has run for mayor multiple times, not because he was manipulated by someone like Max Schreck, but because he was born into a wealthy family and has a lot of connections to Gotham's upper class. Not to mention all of his mob connections with his drug running and arms dealing. The Penguin is supposed to reflect the gluttony of Gotham's elite, compared to Batman, who for the most part has disowned his upper class status and embraced his Batman life. But here, just like Catwoman, the Penguin is a very literal portrayal of the first thing that pops to mind when you hear Penguin Man. He's a crazy, deformed, out-of-his-mind monster that lives in the sewers, eats raw fish, was raised by penguins, and has zero charisma or social skills. Not to mention, he doesn't even know who his parents are at the beginning of the movie, and when he finds out, he doesn't use that influence or connections with Gotham's elite to, foster relationships and promote himself, start businesses, maybe reform the mafia that the Joker destroyed in the first movie. None of that. He's just this disgusting, waddling creature that spits slime on you whenever he talks. So yeah, as a Batman adaptation, this movie really doesn't work. And it just proves the point that this movie was not made because Tim Burton wanted to tell another Batman story. It was because he just wanted to experiment with the style and images that he thought would be cool. And what's really disappointing is that if there were just a handful of creative decisions that went another way, this movie could have been a lot better. For example, if Tim Burton really wanted to have his villain be a monster living in the sewer that was rejected by society because he's too ugly, too deformed, and he wants to keep that impressive zoo set that they built for the movie, just replace Penguin with Killer Croc. It fits a lot better with the tone that this movie's going for and how he was portrayed in the comics, and just imagine what Tim Burton's design of a Killer Croc could have looked like. It would have been impressive. And by virtue of Killer Croc being a cannibal in the comics, you could take this to some really dark, mature, twisted places that Tim Burton clearly wanted to go with this franchise. Or if you do want to keep the Penguin, don't make him a monster. Make him a gangster. You made the Joker much more of a gangster compared to what he was in the comics. Why not do the same thing with Penguin? At least it would be consistent. And if you did it this way, the whole running for mayor subplot would make a lot more sense, and just have that be the end game of your movie. Because Batman clearly doesn't want an arms dealer, drug dealer, what have you, to be the mayor of Gotham City. And as for Catwoman, just simplify. You don't need an origin story. You don't need her to be a zombie with 9 lives. Just make her a cat burglar and you can still have that romance with Batman. You can make them both damaged people. That's actually one of the plot points that was done pretty well, is how these two people are very messed up, but they find comfort in spending time with each other. And if you do want to give Catwoman an origin story, you could have her work for Harvey Dent. Yeah, remember Billy D. Williams in the first movie? He is nowhere to be found in this movie, which is odd because he did leave such an impression in the first one, and they were clearly setting up him to be Two-Face in a future installment, so why not have him play more of a role here? In fact, you could have Harvey Dent become Two-Face at the end of this movie, when Catwoman gets her revenge and maybe claws out half of his face, turning him into the villain that we know. Or maybe it could be some other way, but in keeping with Tim Burton's style, the twisted scarring and irregular patterns that would come from just being clawed by Catwoman could lead to some interesting Tim Burton-esque visuals. And then there's this whole thing about the circus performers. What really is their purpose? Aside from just being generic henchmen, they don't really have one. But I think there is some potential here. If you get rid of Max Schreck, you simplify Catwoman's origin, and you pick a lane between the Mayor Penguin and Monster Killer Croc, you will free up a lot of time to explore some of these ideas further. And you may not know this, but the circus was actually going to play a role in the original 1989 Batman. In the scene that was cut, but it shows the Joker attacking this traveling circus that came to town, which just so happens to be the same circus that Robin, Dick Grayson, and the rest of his family work for. And while I understand why they cut Robin from the first movie because it's just a Batman story, with Batman Returns you have a little bit more freedom. If Tim Burton really liked the idea of the Red Triangle Gang in the circus, why not make the Red Triangle Circus be the home of the Flying Graysons? And even if Robin doesn't team up with Batman in this movie, it would still be an interesting setup and tease for the third movie, on top of just making the Red Triangle Gang feel a bit more relevant to the story. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Batman Returns. Do I like the movie? No, I think it's a terrible adaptation of Batman comics. And while it does have some good things in it, like the music and the visuals and the effects and the relationship between Keaton and Michelle Pfeiffer, the plot is just way too convoluted, and it's just a case of Tim Burton throwing too many ideas at the screen without distilling it down to what would work for the story. So if you're a diehard Batman fan, you'll probably be disappointed in how these characters were portrayed. And if you're a diehard Tim Burton fan, you're going to love the visuals and the aesthetic of this movie, but the plot is so complicated and it demands so much of your attention that you can't just sit back and take it in as a visual experience. And I know I'm going to get a lot of hate for this, but I will stand by my opinion that Batman and Robin, directed by Joel Schumacher, is a better adaptation of Batman comics than Batman Returns. I know there's a lot of you that probably don't agree with that last statement, but comment below, which one do you like better, Batman and Robin or Batman Returns? They're very different movies, and I'm curious to see which one people like more. But if you like this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more content, and hit the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a video. And Tim Burton Month is trucking right along, where next week I'm not going to be talking about Batman anymore. I'm going to be talking about one of his more divisive films, his adaptation of Sleepy Hollow. I'll tell you what I think about it next week, and as always, I'm Colby. This is my nerdy talk, and I'll see you in the next video.